Hi, and welcome to We Can Relate. I'm Twilla.
I'm Sky.
And I'm Naya.
We're 5 siblings, 10 years apart. And as you can see today, the women are taking over. So it's the 3 sisters. The brothers are elsewhere. So here we are. We're related, we're relatable. And today, guys, I wanted to discuss critical race theory. There's been a lot of discussion, I think, in the news over the past couple of months about critical race theory, what critical race theory is and what it is not. But for those of you who don't know, critical race theory is the study of race in systems. That's the most general way to break it down. So like how legal systems and systems within institutions perpetuate racism and further create inequalities down the line. And proponents for this say it's a great thing to teach in school and education so that kids can have a more sensitive approach or understand how racism plays a part in our everyday life and is not always perpetuated by individuals. And there are some critics, quite a few critics, who say, no, this just perpetuates division, tribalism. It puts white kids against black kids. And basically our kids shouldn't be taught to hate themselves. So it's very nuanced, and you can imagine who these groups are who often are critiquing the idea of critical race theory being taught in schools. It's a very conservative group of people. It's a very heated discussion. I actually saw footage from a school in Virginia where
like the school board, right?
It was a school board meeting, and the school board meeting was more so about like transgender sports ban, that sort of thing. But it turned into critical race theory, and it turned into parents. It got really, really unruly, and parents, back to back saying why critical race theory should not be taught in schools and it's not the school's place, and white kids should not be taught to hate themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And so go ahead, Scholastica.
I have a question because I try not to keep up with things that might anger me, but is this not just systemic racism, and has it not always been taught in a way?
It hasn't always been taught. So a lot of times you don't learn. What we learn in school is that there was slavery. You learn that there was some states led. You do learn that there was state-led violence, such as like Jim Crow in that era. But you don't learn like the long-term like redlining when it comes to going to get a loan at the bank and try to get a certain house. Like you weren't allowed to have certain Black people weren't allowed to live in certain places. You don't learn that systematically a lot of people of color don't get loans at the same rate as Black people, as white people, no matter how qualified they are. You don't learn about the school to prison pipeline system. You don't learn how like the police were actually formed and what that role played in our communities. So there's a lot of things that's been absent from the teaching of this.
Basically, they don't want the whole story because if we're learning about slavery and the wars and stuff, all the other stuff, and that's the stuff in between that makes everything kind of make sense and can really create that change. But I guess when you've mentioned which group they are, they don't want that. But
it's so interesting because I listened to it a little bit, but it's like from what I glean, I'm like, so you don't want the truth, like it's weird that we're like steps behind. Like the argument is like whether or not it even exists, right? Like some people don't believe, there's people that say like America's not a racist country, and like I guess semantically maybe I don't know what you're getting at, but some people believe that racism doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And so like some people don't believe that there's actual systematic racism, which is that in itself is like
because they haven't been taught it.
Right. The cycle continues. It's crazy though, like because it's like we know that it exists, we feel it, and then I feel like there's a lot that I've learned in recent years that maybe I didn't know it, but we still felt it, so that when we learned it, we knew it was true and we saw examples of it.
Just kind of putting the name to the feeling, or the name to
the feeling, the experience. And it's interesting. I was like, oh wait, so some people are arguing whether or not this is even real, right? Like that is
Yeah.
kind of what critics
So
say.
there's
Like it's
people
not a real
arguing, yeah, they're arguing if it's real or not. What's the point of teaching this? But there's other people who's like, why are you going to teach this if we can question its realness? Like we don't really know. There's no, to them, no
Like
excuse me, no quantifiable way of saying this exists. And then furthermore, why are you going to teach this and have my white child feel guilty for being white?
Why do you
And
feel bad? You gotta feel bad.
You know how I felt in third grade learning about slavery, being the only Black kid in class. So it's like the feelings, if we have to feel the things we felt, the sadness of our ancestors and all the stuff, like,
yeah,
I'm
Do we
not
not
saying that
teach
then
the
you need to be sad, it's like, but we all need to
Yeah.
hear it. So, you know.
but we
Do we
live in
not
a
teach
system.
the Holocaust? Do we not teach about like other things? Like
Yeah.
it's hard truth. Life is hard. What we don't like just protect people. Like you don't take out the truth in order to protect people's feelings. That's actually a really weird way to look at education.
And what is it called? Critical race what?
Theory.
Theory. So we learn theories all the time and like science and all this stuff. So even if you didn't believe it to be true, let me just present one way that some people, a group of people have seen it, you know.
Well, and then you also have to think about it from this perspective. There are groups of people and there's true like schools that no longer say slavery. They say
Don't do it. I'm gonna be so mad.
I'm trying to think of the actual terms. Oh my gosh. It was like volunteer work group or involuntary workers.
Nope. Involuntary workers. Oh, I'm gonna slap someone. Oh.
Yeah, like it was actually like on some worksheets where parents were like in a group of Africans that were involuntary workers came or voluntary work groups that came to build the United States.
Like they're upset because they're already trying to alter it and kind of sugarcoat it. So adding this would really just ruin everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Add on to that how like there's been this push against like Confederate statues, Confederate soldiers, Confederate namings. Like people in the US are like, hey, we're not going to celebrate these monuments of hate that rather me and my ancestors have been in chains and continuing to support your economy without you paying me or without treating me as a full human. We're no longer going to support this. And people are instead crying, well, these are my ancestors and, they fought for our freedoms. And it's like, but they fought against mine. So this is the mindset that we're having to work into, right? And this is just, we see rules, like laws are being passed in states like Tennessee and Texas. I'm sure there's trying in Arizona and different places where they're trying to push laws that basically say teachers cannot teach critical race theories or any type of education that pretty much would make white kids feel guilty or divide school groups.
That's so broad though. You could say anything is
divisive. So now it's taken away from education and learning what the truth is. And I take this personally because I remember when I went to college was my first time taking an African American studies class, right? I refused to take it. These were my exact words. I was like, I don't want to learn any more white people's history because I've taken American history, which felt very white and it shouldn't be white. And I've taken European history and I could tell you Greek history. I could tell you Latin history. I like history, but I was no longer interested in those stories. So when I took African American history and just learned the things that I learned, I was so upset that I didn't learn this in a public school. It's not like I went to a private institution. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to learn this in the same state that I got this education, was giving me this education, would not give it to me as a kid. Now, UNC is another story that we can talk about, but like the frustration of not learning my history on that level, like I was angry. I was so angry at the school system.
Yeah, it's crazy. I actually, when you talked about the involuntary workers, I pulled up this screenshot I had from years ago. I was looking on Rachel Cargill's Instagram page and someone took a snapshot of like this textbook, like a description of the Atlantic slave trade. And it said the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. That is just, that sounds nice, right? That's
Like,
so
oh
ridiculous.
wow, they got was it a nice little cruise ship that they hopped on? Where did
Yeah,
they
like,
all get their own individual cabins and were they fed daily?
I think my confusion is at what point, like all this time we've been learning about like slavery as slavery and not involuntary workers and so on, what has it taken away from them? Like nothing, it's not like something has changed so radically from us knowing our history. You know what I mean? Like,
I think we're when you get into critical race theory, that's talking more about things that are happening now, I guess, and it impacts the power system and how things are now. And it, you know, so I think it's good enough to hear. It almost is maybe they probably in some way it probably was beneficial for us to hear to other parties that we were slaves. You know, even the terms like slave, slave owner, and how their people are changing it to like the enslaved and the enslaver, because I mean that speaks to our identity. You know how you said it didn't feel too good in third grade. So it is interesting now that they're like completely whitewashing it and euphemizing it, or if that's even a word. You know, but I think there was almost some value to other parties for us to see ourselves as slaves and to know that part. But then when you talk about, oh, this is still impacting us, it's still unfair, it's not just internally the person's fault or these groups of people's fault that they're struggling with like all these things, you know, even like hypertension, all that stuff that we deal with, you know, it's like, oh, now we're actually being honest. And I feel like America has this thing. I am a fan of America. I'm American, you know, like, but it's almost like we have a pride identity issue, you know, like where it's like, we're not a racist country. And it's like, literally, bro, like our country was literally built by slaves, okay? And then like, there was an actual war fought because people wanted slaves. And even the president at that time still didn't think that Black people were good. He thought we should go back somewhere, you know, he didn't think we should be integrated. Like, and then like there's so many things, it actually is historically racist. And I mean, maybe you're looking to an ideal, and I think you have to identify, be honest about the past in order to move forward. So I think even Joe Biden, some people, different people have said things like racism, America isn't a racist country, I think meaning well, but I think you should say we have been, but let's move forward to better.
Right.
You know what
This
I mean?
is not who we strive to be. Like, and I think a lot of times, like to your point, Naya, like if you have young Black kids feeling ashamed of their history, that they think our history began in slavery. And then if you don't have, and then like to teach that it was so long ago, that racism was so long ago, that by this time we should have built, you know, was it the bootstrap theory? Like, you know, built us, how you say it?
Pull yourself up by the
Pull yourself up by the bootstrap by this time, because slavery was 400 years ago. So like now you don't have the excuses for being poor, for having inadequate health care, and you don't have an example, you don't have the reason that you are overweight, the reason you have hypertension and diabetes is now your own fault. The reason that you don't have wealth is now your own fault. But when you take something like critical race theory and say, well, actually, this has the very foundation of our country and the systems and the institutions that guide our everyday life are still so deeply embedded in slavery that it was never created for our people. It was created for a white man to thrive in this society. And therefore, women were never supposed to fare, and Black people most certainly were never supposed to fare and do well in this society. So systemically, we're still feeling the ills of racism. That hits hard for a lot of people, and people don't want to believe that, and they want it to be our own fault.
And it's just acknowledging, and so we can't move forward. Like we already know what happened, so it's not like now that you know, now something, you know what I mean, is why would you want to live in a place like that? Like what is even the benefit? Like why walk around with hatred and not moving forward? Just learn
literally
it, do better.
Arguably, in the short term, at least, it does seem to benefit people. I mean, there is that, what was that phrase, did MLK say it, where it's like, you know, if anyone, like injustice for like one group of people is like injustice for all,
Yeah.
but in the short term, it does benefit people to keep certain groups of people oppressed and to act like it's not a problem. The crime rates over there, that's those people's issues. And I do want to say, of course, we know that there is personal agency. And yes, that we've seen examples of Black and brown people being successful, but that doesn't, sometimes people even use that as proof, right? Like,
Well,
see,
Oprah did it.
yeah,
Y'all ain't even achieved Oprah's level. Come
like,
on.
it's like, you really got to recognize even just the amount of wealth accumulation that we're behind on. Like, people literally had free labor for like generations, and they're still benefiting off of that wealth to this day,
Called where like when the slave owners lost their slaves, they got reparations of sort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is it called again? I forgot.
I don't know.
I don't remember. But yeah. And then we still never got 40 acres and a mule. And a lot of people ended up being sharecroppers on the very plantations that they worked on, because they were like, well, I guess we could come up with some trade system, and sharecropping was still not beneficial. It was just a legalized slave, like a rebirth of what slavery was. So I say all that because we understand how important it is historically for us to understand that what we're going through, like, we know this, and I think we see it in our everyday lives, but people are so against it that more recently, in the past couple of weeks, there's been this battle at UNC Chapel Hill. I mentioned that, of course, that's my alma mater. I'm a Tar Heel born, Tar Heel dead. Well, I don't know about all that, but I'm Tar Heel bred. But lately, UNC has been going through its own battles because one of our alum, Nikole Hannah-Jones, who is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and behind the 1619 Project, if you don't know, it's a very thorough take of our history and how slavery helped build up America and its impact on Black people, right? And it's from such a different approach that she's received a lot of criticism. Schools, like, there's been some school systems and teachers who are like, this is so impressive, I want to teach it. And then you had like, I think what's his name, Tom Cotton down in the South.
Of course, that's his last name.
Tom Cotton, is he a senator or a representative somewhere? But basically, he has like set his whole mission on like, any school that's teaching the 1619 Project will not get funding, like that. Like, he hates it that much. So imagine when bringing this well-qualified Black woman who has created this, the 1619 Project. She's up for, at Carolina, they offer her a position. And at the time when they offer it, they don't offer it without tenure to her. And people are upset, quite so, like, no, she is supposed to get tenure. And there's been like a push back and forth, and the board of trustees stepping in places that they shouldn't step in, and and being urged by some big time private donors to not give this woman her complete what she was owed, right? Because she's done the work, she's a great journalist, but because of her stance on critical race theory, she thinks that it should be taught. And somehow these people felt that this would take away from her being there, would take away from the university being there with tenure. They wanted her, but they did not want to extend her tenure at this certain point. And so imagine this Black woman being super qualified to be at this position at the School of Journalism, and all of a sudden, like, there was pushback from Black alum and nationwide just saying, give this woman tenure. Eventually, UNC gave in and offered her tenure. And good sis Nikole was like, actually, no, because I worked hard. You were uncomfortable in my Blackness, and you didn't like, I've proven who I was, and you don't see my full value. Guess what? I'm going to Howard University and I'm going to work on their program. And the UNC alum in me and the Howard was like, okay, girl, you got to do what you got to do. You want to work where you can be heard and felt, right? And respected. You don't want to have to fight to be seen all the time. And so I do think that was a good move, but I'm looking at UNC like, bro, y'all got work to do. This university, they had some stuff with Silent Sam. I'm not dumping on Carolina this whole time, but I'm very disappointed in my university. I'm gonna let that be known. So until then, HU all the way, baby. But that just her rejecting that job and saying basically, kiss my tail, I'm gonna go where I'm seen and heard, had me thinking about what it is to be Black in professional settings, right? And like wondering, do we always feel heard? Do we feel qualified? Like, have there been examples of systematic racism in workplaces for you? And or just where you see like racism playing a slight role systematically, right? And then furthermore, it got me thinking that if you put it in perspective of critical race theories, that a lot of these institutions that people work at were created long ago, or might have been created by white men or whatever, but wasn't necessarily created for us. And how do we know this? They start hiring diversity and inclusion people to teach people how to be more sensitive diversity wise. But that lets me know that diversity and inclusion was never part of your culture when you have to bring somebody in to teach it. And what does that look like? And what does it mean? And it just got my mind completely going. I don't know if y'all have any immediate thoughts on what that is.
Well, yeah, a couple of things that you brought up. One, I would say, like, instead of thinking specifically about like how I've seen examples of systemic racism in my workplace, it just makes me think of how like Nikole Hannah-Jones was like, let me go somewhere where I can be seen and respected. And I feel like that was never something that I thought about in workplaces, because you are just used to being in settings and institutions that, you kind of know they weren't made for you, you kind of just used to being other with, and it's like kind of almost normalized. And so I never even thought of that. I remember, Twill, you were telling me when I was looking for schools to consider Howard University. I am a HU, I was.
You can't do that.
Oh, okay. Well, I was like, my alma mater is USC. I'm glad I went to that school, but I do wish that I had given more thought to the power of being surrounded by just like beautiful, different Black people from everywhere, So I think that that's something I think about more now. Like wherever I move, wherever I work, like weighing that, not saying I won't work somewhere where there's not like majority Black people or whatever, but even just the culture that like reflects and respects diversity and inclusion. Or do I want to be in a place where there are more, like more people that look like me? So it's actually something that I think about now that I never thought about growing up. So I think it's really cool that Nikole Hannah-Jones kind of did the same. I don't think she wanted to have to do that, but I think it'll be a healthy move for her.
Yeah, for sure.
Quick note, that thing was called compensated emancipation. But I think that for me, immediately, I can't necessarily think of something that has like an experience that happened in the workplace to me, but being a teacher in a school where it's predominantly Hispanic and Black, and then a lot of the teachers are not, especially in my particular grade band, I think I saw this need for diversity, inclusion, or just like, I just feel like there's a certain place that kind of stops, like you can't understand like through brown lenses in a way, you know what I mean? Like some of the expectations or some of the things like that, it didn't feel like it was malicious or it didn't feel racist, but it was kind of because, if that makes sense. And the other thing, I also noticed that it's something I do because of just being a Black woman. I don't speak up a lot. I've noticed. And that really is something I've been trying to work on. Like, even in situations where it's warranted to be angry, I stop myself because
Mhm.
I don't want to be seen as the angry Black woman that is upholding all Black women in that moment. Like, if I do this thing, this is going to speak for all Black people, even if it makes sense to, like, someone slapped you in the face, you should yell. But now I'm going to just be like really calm and zen. Like, I felt like I couldn't have a full range of emotions. It's always kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
this.
I definitely relate to that. Yeah.
Me too. I've definitely been like passionate about something and then felt like you like looked back on what I said and how I said it. And I was like, was it too passionate? So that sounded like angry or sassy, and then just being in my head about it for a long period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an actual burden. I remember, like, in one of my supervising positions, somebody said something, and I really, in that moment, needed to express how dissatisfied I was and actually how pissed off I was. But because it was me as a Black woman needing to reprimand this white male, I felt that in this moment I could be seen as the angry, sassy Black woman. So going back to my coworker, who's also a white male, he was like, "You totally should have cussed them out." And I was like, "I don't have the same privilege." And I just told him point blank, "I don't have that same privilege. I would love to," but it comes across differently when coming from me. And I also think to like, when I think about like the industry I work in entertainment, and entertainment is very much fun. I think it's often glamorized, but I realized that it's not necessarily. So there's a lot of programs for, let's get more diverse writers and let's get more diverse directors. And here's a fellowship for this and a fellowship for that. And it's just like, so you can find more Black talent, which is not hidden. And you just go on the internet and you'll find all this amazing Black talent, but all of a sudden you have to find this Black talent. And it's been like, it's one of those clubs where you hire your friends often, like people, and a lot of times it's people that look like you. So it's a heavily white male driven industry, and it has been since its inception, because you just hire people that right? And you still see it perpetuated, but you also see it in things like the rates that you pay PAs. Like, they can barely afford to live, that it's a luxury, I think, to be able to take a job as a PA. And there's actual statistics. I wish I had known them. I should have written those down, but there's actual statistics on how many people, PAs, do not go beyond PA because they can't afford that lifestyle, especially PAs of color. And then when you get to certain positions, so you get, say if you found a Black writer through a diversity program, and you bring them and you staff them in a room, a lot of times these Black writers stay as the lower level writers for a long time. So like that first year, because they're not paid, it's through the studio or whatever, you'll come in as a staff writer. There's different levels in the writing room, like staff writer, story editor, supervising, so on, co-producer, etc. And so a lot of times, statistically, a lot of these Black writers stay at the level of staff writers way longer than what white writers would, just because. So it's like, what's happening? What is happening in this system where you're looking for us, but you only want us for certain ideas or for numbers, and you're not really trying to include us? That lets me know there's some failure in your diversity and inclusion. Like, you're finding these Black writers, and we have stories of Black writers who do amazing, right? We have Misha Green, we have Ava DuVernay. Like, we have people that's doing wonderful work. So I don't want it to sound like we don't. Of course, we know that we have Arlena Waves, we have writers, we have creatives, but they still have to go through these systems that historically hasn't embraced us, or
Yeah,
something might be too Black.
didn't Ava have to, in some of her like earlier works, utilize the kind of a network of like African American film festivals in order to get some of her first
Yeah.
like movies shown? So yeah, it's even that she had to utilize a network of people that understood the value of her story, because in indie film, there actually, for a while, for a long time, wasn't space for Black stories to be told. So even that, like, she's successful, but she had to find. That's why that diversity, inclusion, and those pipelines and all those things set up are important. But yeah, it definitely can be done. But I know that's also the case in corporate settings, Tula. Like, that getting people to the C-suite. Like, you'll see people at all the positions below, but actually getting people like of color and women of color into the C-suite, that's difficult because people choose people that they're more familiar with or whatever. So
What is a C-suite?
Corporate suite, like high level, like CEO or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It is tough, and we can, I think people are well intended and well meaning, but there's way more work that has to happen. And I see it because there is a difference. People now reach out to me to say, hi, do you have any PAs, preferably of color? Like, you're not supposed to say that, but people say it, like, and it's because, like, usually I do, like, I try to make sure I have a roster of young people who are looking to get in this industry. But then it's also that thing that I definitely have to set aside when I call them and be like, hey, are you interested in this job? Okay, great. So-and-so is going to call you. Don't you dare embarrass me. You perform. I don't care what those other white boys are doing. You make sure you look good. Like that sort of, because like some PAs can slack. That's just part of what some PAs do, and they get promoted. We can't do that. And we don't want to stay PAs forever. I need you to make this money, make a good, look good in front of them, make a good impression, get promoted so that you're not making $15 an hour for the next 5 years,
Yeah. And I know, Tul, you said that a lot of people are well-meaning. I think that's true to some extent. I do think that, like, right now with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, a lot of companies are doing it because it's like, now you just look bad if you don't have those efforts, So I do think that what's that, Stella?
And money, because if people are like, they support Black things,
yeah, exactly. Now, consumers are looking for people who support the social things that they care about. So yeah, I think the next phase of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is like actually the authentic caring about it, because I've noticed in some places that I've worked that maybe they have those efforts in place, but the actual enforcement of it is weaker, because it's like, okay, so you think it's important just to like say you've tried it, but to actually be like really almost like proactive in looking for Black people that are available for higher positions. Don't just say, oh, we open a certain number of chairs or a certain number of interviews for those people. Like, they might not look at you as a possible place because of your lack of diversity. So you have to do more efforts to even make people feel like this is a place where they can be, and don't place it on them to then be the voice of all Black people. Like, don't also ask them to be some sort of DEI chair, so I think if people come from the place of understanding, like, oh, it's actually important for us to have people in these higher positions, then the intensity and, that they move forward in trying to actually implement those efforts would be stronger. And also just recognizing, like, oh, other people, either whether it be other students in this institution, other staff members, they really actually need to be seen. It actually is so important. It's not something that like, oh, we'll open it, hopefully someone comes in, that's kind of what I've seen in places that I've worked.
Yeah, so I do think like these institutions that are hiring these diversity and inclusion group like positions, or in trying to create programs around it, like you said, have to be more intentional, like have to realize that it's more than, it's changing a culture, and it's letting go of certain ideals and stereotypes that you might have held before. It's making a true effort across the board and sometimes reaching a little deeper to do the work. It can't just be a surface level thing. I absolutely agree. I have overheard some very cringe-worthy diversity discussions. So in one, it was hearing someone talk about hiring or wanting to include, it was an influencer saying that they want to include more Black women in their, their features in their feeds. And she was like, yeah, I talked to this fabulous Black lady who, like, it's a whole group of Black people that all went to the same great school. I don't know if you've heard of like Jack and Jill. It's like a society thing that they're all part of, and they're like of good stock, and they're all rich, and they're all beautiful, and they're all well traveled. So like they can get you anybody that you need. Like they can. So like I just like, hey girl, can you get me so and so? Like, and it was just like, and so now I have my diversity, and I was like, it's just, I don't know why it just rubbed me the wrong way. Like, I was just like,
It's kind of like, oh, I've got this, like, I don't know, I have this inventory of, cool, successful Black people that are good enough and that fit, my
yeah,
needs.
and the
Like,
good enough, that type of
I got my
image.
tokens here.
Yeah. And it very much felt like they're Jack and Jill, they're rich. These are the Black people that's tolerable enough for me to deal with.
Yeah, like, can we be like normal Black people and be good enough too?
Right. You're not interested in that Black,
Yeah.
I feel like though, like I think it definitely has to be like the culture of the whole company shifting and like having no tolerance for anything else. But this is the same place that's trying to erase this critical theory. So it's like, go, how could I expect more? Because like my principal so good at doing that. He's a white man, but he was like so for like, this is how it's gonna be. Like if you get uncomfortable, that's fine because we need this, right? But then it's like people in the assistant principal too, they're very much like, yes. But then the staff, like some of the comments I've heard, like one person missed the staff meeting and was like, girl, you didn't miss anything, it was too heavy. And I was sitting here as a Black person listening to this white conversation, like, it was too heavy for you for those 30 minutes to an hour.
It's too much. It's too much.
Every day.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, it's easy for people. It's like a privilege, which I'm not always like, I'm not necessarily mad at people for having privilege. Like, I sometimes liken it to like when crazy things are happening, it's across the world at least, but like, we're not necessarily as engaged because it's like, oh, that sucks. Okay, prayers up to, whatever country's going through something. Right. So I feel like people have the ability, like even going back to like, put more intentionality behind your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. But to them, it's not dire. But to us, it's like, it's so important for us to be seen, right. And like these students need to be seen, all this type of thing. So it's like, we feel how dire it is. So right now they can kind of operate from a place of like, it might be good to do this. It's a good look. Or yeah, I know some cool Black people, but first it's like, we need this. This is so important.
Right. Yeah. It's more so immediate. Like, it's like you've been dragging your legs, your whatever, for 400 years. We need this. We are dying, people. Like, we need to build this wealth. We need to get healthy. We need grocery stores in our neighborhoods. We need, like this violence to be cut back because poverty a lot of times yields more violence. And, so we need stuff to happen so that we can continue to live. And we're not just a stat or like the revolution can take place anytime it needs to. No, let it happen now. Like,
you know what? And I understand both sides. Like, I understand feeling like, oh, I don't want to like do this. Like what you're saying about like over there, those things are going on. I mean, I could go and help volunteer, but I could just be here and feel sorry. So I understand that's probably how a majority of non-POC people feel. Like, I'm sorry, but this is a lot of work, or like this is going to stir up too much.
A lot of work, right?
Huh?
Sometimes we feel like it's a lot of work and we don't want to do it.
So that exactly. So I feel like it almost feels like if we're looking forward to be inclusive and stuff, it actually would take mostly the non-POC because they are in that position to really take the brunt of the work. But if it's too much, then it's then on us to create our own places and not be so wanting to be like, why can't we just all hold hands and sing? And like, okay, maybe it can't be that. I don't know. So like, we don't need to work so hard on trying to get your approval. We can just make our own areas and do, and like, you know, like BET Awards. I don't know how like behind the scenes Black or whatever that is, but you know, like we're doing our own stuff and we can just uplift each other in that way. But then it's still a lot of work on that end because we as a people also have a lot of work to do. So it's just like you said, I am one of those people that kind of like, this is too hard. I don't want to be too angry. I don't want to be too sad. It's a lot of work, but I know in order for it to move forward, you kind of have to. But I'm like, I can just do stuff in my own backyard. But even that in my own backyard seems like a lot of work. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of in between. I feel like I was coasting and then 2020 made me like wake up. And also made me feel like change could happen. So it made me want to be more alert. But then, yeah, it's tiring. And I even was thinking about like with critical race theory, it's like I knew the gist of it, but this conversation kind of makes me want to learn more. I almost even wish I could talk to someone who is against it. You know how you want to see other people's sides, like where are you coming from? Is there something I'm missing? Like,
Yeah.
because to me, I'm just like, you know, scholar and I was like, I don't understand. Why is this an issue? So I really want to know, like, why is this an issue? I want to do some more research on that.
but I feel like on the other side, there's really not a lot. Like when I think about like if you ask someone like, why are you racist? Like I feel like if they really sat and thought about it, like because my mama is like there's not much under that. Like so I feel like it might be something that's just like, you know.
Don't know. Got to do the work to figure it out. You know.
I saw this. I'm sorry. I did see this thing that kind of reminded me what you were talking about critical race theory. And somebody said, instead of arguing, it is not taught, that is not taught in schools, or we should like start questioning people or flipping it on their heads when people are asking, why are we trying to teach this? And it goes to say, like, find out what they aren't saying. Like, we need to begin by asking folks who are mad at critical race theory where racial inequalities in legal, healthcare, education, and other sectors come from if they're not systemic, because they aren't saying it, but they think that these things are our fault. So make them say it. Ask them to be specific about historical moments and how they would teach both sides. Examples, Juneteenth, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Make them be specific. Ask them how Black and brown children feel when learning about these things. Ask why white children would feel bad about these things, and explain that we want our children to have tools to recognize white supremacy as an ideology, how it is built into our systems. That should not make white kids feel bad. It should make them also feel empowered to change the system. So just like flip it on its head, you know?
Well said.
Yeah. It's almost like, is that a good place to kind of wrap up? It's like, marinate on that.
Yeah. Think about that. Yeah. It's a lot. And I agree that it can be tiring. I do think mental health breaks are important, but we have to then, you know, we don't always have the luxury of taking mental health breaks when it comes to this, because for many people it's a matter of survival and being able to not just survive. I think as a people, we have survived, we have cultivated culture, you know, we've impacted a lot of things, but we want to also be at the point where we're able to thrive. And that's important for future generations. Like that post said, like we have to understand that we're giving tools to all children about how to address these inequalities and systems. And maybe if it's not a mental health break, is following Nikole Hannah-Jones and going to places where we can be seen and heard and celebrated.
HU?
No.
You can't do it.
Is that
yes? We went to Howard.
Y'all did not. They did not. But I want to, as we wrap up, I just want to encourage people to do more research on critical race theory. Have those discussions, and, you know, see how we can, because there is a real movement to squash this. And I think schools should teach this. Like, a kid should not get to college and be upset that their teacher that they trusted so much never taught them this, and their teachers might not have known, you know? So do the homework. And on top of that, be sure to like, subscribe, comment below, let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about, any thoughts that you might have on critical race theory. Nikole Hannah-Jones, UNC, HU, you know. So I did that. But until next time, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.